Hi, I finally got round to watching Scream, the fifth instalment in the long-running slasher satire series that simply bears the title of the overall series. It's set 11 years after the previous film, Scream 4 from 2011, with the town of Woodsboro now having finally settled down somewhat. However, a new series of ghost face murders start, and some local teenagers involved start to theorize that the killer is reenacting a requel, as it were, making their own sequel to try and give the series of stab movies based on the series of murders a new direction after the very disappointing eighth installment, written and directed by Rian Johnson. That is the extent of the humour in this film. The thing that I really liked about the Scream films was that they were able to combine humour and horror very well. If you watch the first movie again, it's very funny, it's very witty, and it's very eloquent, as well as being a straightforward slasher movie. It manages to combine those two genres almost seamlessly. Scream 2 satirized the idea of sequels to slasher movies, going bigger and more expansive. Scream 3 is where it really starts to fall apart with the idea of completing trilogies, even though that's not really something that horror movies go for. And after an 11-year break, Scream 4 played with the idea of rebooting horror movies. This is a legacy sequel, in a way, with the original three leads, Courteney Cox, Neve Campbell, and David Arquette, all coming back in supporting roles. But it's not a comedy. It's not funny. It really doesn't make any effort to be funny. And the change in tone is really noticeable. It's also the first film in the series not directed by the late Wes Craven. And apart from the third film, it's the only one not written by originator Kevin Williamson. And the lack of wit, the lack of light touch is very noticeable. It's, I think, quite damning to say that this film doesn't have the featherlight humorous touch of Wes Craven, director of Last House on the Left and The Hills Have Eyes. Instead, it's by the horror collective Radio Silence, with James Vanderbilt of the Amazing Spider Man films co writing. And they cannot create interesting characters. The characters we are presented with are all boring, uninteresting people. There is some made of the fact that they are related to participants in the original story, but they're not interesting or engaging personalities or performers. Um, the whole film feels like a very grim, depressing exercise. And I never got the sense that there was any real reason for this film to exist. It feels far too much like a rote slasher movie, even though it's trying to satirize the idea of toxic fandom, of entitlement, of um, people. It has more to do with Star Wars than anything, of fans who couldn't cope with the slight deviation from norms that The Last Jedi represented and go berserk. I'm not aware of horror fans being like that. I could be wrong, but it's not something that really is noticeable. The idea of a legacy sequel in the style of the Halloween movies is referred to, and that seems to have been a more sensible option. But instead, it's as though the makers wanted to push that toxic fandom button, but simply couldn't figure out a way to make it work. So it's very unengaging. It's very weirdly direct. Excuse me. It's very weirdly directed, so that there are scenes that drag out the tension long after it ceased to be engaging, and then suddenly there's a jump scare, which just feels poorly thought out and lazy and not entertaining. Um, the tone is wrong. It's far too long. It's almost 2 hours, and the result was a surprisingly depressing experience. Um, because this film was such a success, a sixth Scream film has already been fast tracked and has apparently already finished shooting and is due for release in March, only 14 months after the previous film. But based on this, I have no real interest to see it. Nev Campbell has said that she's not coming back because they refused to pay her enough, which, given that she decided to do this film, seems like, why would you not pay the lead of the original movies enough to be in your movie? makes you think that the cast you have are incredibly engaging. None of them leapt out as being particularly interesting. Jack Quaid, Jenna Ortega are the only ones whose names even were remotely memorable because they've gone on to other interesting work. But for the most part, it's a sad, boring, unfunny, unfrightening, tensionless exhumation of a franchise that really should have been put out of its misery a long time ago. The first film is a classic, arguably. The second film tries to expand it further. Scream 4 makes an effort with a new concept, but Scream 3 can be easily forgotten, particularly as it was massively rewritten to try and compensate for script leaks. And this is just completely disposable, almost unwatchable, and certainly one of the worst films of the year.